Both the Alien and Predator franchises have had a mixed bag of video games, with some really great ones and equally some pretty shoddy ones, so of course make sure you check out our videos covering some of those games. It was a dream come true when they announced the Alien vs Predator movies, but as we all know, they turned out to be kind of abysmal. And of course it's a popular franchise, which actually started out way before the movies as a comic book, and as we know, anything popular will generally get a video game. But are the AVP video games any good? Well, how about I shut the hell up and we take a look at some of them. We are going to start in the arcade this time with Alien vs Predator from Capcom. Guess what? The story is here. Yep, that's right, there is a war between the aliens and the predators. Thankfully, us humans have gotten involved and are actually allied with the predators, which is actually a very sensible idea. And up to 2 players can choose from 2 human characters or 2 predators to dish out some punishment to those alien bastards. So the game itself is a beat 'em up in the style of Final Fight, which probably means you already know exactly what to expect. Each of the characters have slightly different stats, with some being faster but weaker, others being slower but stronger, and you have everything in between. Thankfully though, they are all fun to play as, and although it generally boils down to just hammering the attack button, each character does have their own weapons and specials that work differently, meaning you will find your favourite, and for me it's the awesome Lieutenant Kurosawa, who really deserves her own video game. Oh, and it's also worth mentioning here that the human male character is actually Dutch Schaefer, Arnie's character from the first Predator movie, who is now an experienced alien killer. Does that make this canon? I don't know, and I don't really care. It's just a video game. Anyway, the game looks fantastic, with some really good graphics on all the characters, enemies and locations. There's a lot of detail and a crazy amount of enemies coming at you at all times. It makes it a real coin muncher though. While it can be tricky to get past a level or 2 without dying, the quality of the controls and overall combat is just so fun that you'll want to keep coming back. And speaking of the enemies, the majority of them are of course xenomorphs, and there have been some liberties taken with different types of them to keep things fresh. You've got your warrior aliens that just run at you, you've got others that will spit acid, slide across the room at you, and some that behave like Blanca, doing crazy spin attacks. The bosses here are all massive and kinda cheap, like you'd expect for an arcade beat 'em up, but let's face it, most of us are going to be playing this with unlimited credits. Really, that is all there is to the game. It is really your standard beat 'em up fare, but with the AVP license thrown on, which has, by the way, been handled really well, and I don't mean that in a bad way. There's plenty of references for the fans, but when it boils down to it, the game doesn't really do too much differently to other games of the genre. But yes, having said that, this probably is one of my favourite games of the genre. The action is solid, the controls here are fantastic, and the fact that it all looks and sounds so good just make you want to keep playing all the way to the end, even if it does start to get a little bit repetitive. I definitely do recommend giving this one a playthrough, especially if you've got a mate that can join you. We're going to have some handheld action now with the Alien vs Predator, the last of his clan, for the Game Boy. This is a side-scrolling platform game where you play as a predator, who, shockingly, is the last of his clan after the alien bastards wiped out the rest of them. So you're out to get revenge against those slimy scumbags. The game looks alright, it's got some pretty basic sprites and animation, but they do the job. Each of the levels looks different enough, though there's only 5 of them, so that really should be a given. Your main goal here is just to explore some maze-like levels. You'll collect keys, items and weapons along the way that will help you progress to the next stage. You've got a map at the top of the screen that slowly gets revealed as you explore the levels. This is a nice touch, and what I also like is that you have an energy meter which actually acts as a bit of a timer, but if the energy runs out, you don't die or lose the level, which is what I assumed would happen. Instead, you lose your map, and it only shows a few pixels ahead or behind you. If you collect more energy once it's been totally depleted, you don't get back what you'd already revealed, and you have to start again. I actually quite like this technique. Thankfully, you don't really need the map at all though, if you've got a good memory or you're just happy to explore the levels. You'll also find weapons, some of which have their own ammo, and some use a chunk of your energy. This means you don't want to use them that often. Thankfully, your standard punch attack is pretty powerful, and even in the later levels where enemies take more hits, they're pretty easy to deal with your standard attacks. In terms of enemies, there aren't actually that many types. You get your basic standard alien and facehuggers, and of course at the end you have to face off against an alien queen, which actually looks pretty cool. As the levels are giant mazes, you'll need to find keys to open pathways, and you can also pick up cartoon-looking bombs which you can drop to destroy certain walls. All of these are easy to use thanks to a decent menu system. Unfortunately though, it does make every level feel basically the same. You've seen everything the game is going to throw at you after you've beaten the first level, with the only real difference being the layout of the level. Having said that though, I did find that I actually quite enjoyed playing this game. It is quite basic and definitely flawed, but for some reason I just wanted to carry on trying until I got to the boss. Once you've learned where things are on the levels, you can breeze through the game in about half an hour, which actually is perfect for a game like this. The hit detection is pretty wonky, but once you get used to the timing of your attacks, you can actually have some good fun with this. I would say to give this one a go if you can find it cheap or on an emulator, but do give it a few minutes to get used to the controls before you give up on it. Like I said, it's definitely not perfect by any means. In fact, it's basically just damn average, but I did have a bit of fun with it. Oh, and I do have to mention the best thing about the game, which is the Predator's juicy booty that you get to see when he's climbing a ladder. Check this out. We'll stick with the handhelds very briefly with Alien vs Predator for the Atari Lynx, which I think is the first Lynx game I've talked about on this channel, mainly because most of them suck. But to be fair to AVP on the Lynx, it's actually only a prototype version and was never released. This is actually a very early build from what I can tell, so really this is just to show you what maybe could have been. Impressively, it's actually a first-person shooter where you get to choose to play as either a human or Predator character. Then you head down some very narrow corridors, which in this build are totally empty apart from the human character that appears every now and then, and some health kits. I couldn't tell if I was meant to fight the woman that I kept seeing or if she was my ally. There didn't appear to be any sort of hit detection in this version, so really all you can do is wander around some pretty empty corridors not doing a lot. Now, for a Lynx game, it actually looked like it could have been quite impressive. It actually plays better than most of the ones I've played that actually got released. The scrolling here is super smooth, but you do turn instantly. And really, that's all I can tell you about it. Honestly, I would have liked to have seen a full version of this, as it does genuinely look like it could have been quite enjoyable, but I guess we'll never know. Super Nintendo time now, and we're heading to the year 2493 and to the planet Vega, where your usual Alien vs Predator shenanigans are going on. This is another beat 'em up, similar to the arcade game, but this is not a port, but its own thing, and Capcom had nothing to do with it, which actually really shows. In fact, it was made by Activision, thankfully before microtransactions were invented. Graphically, the game isn't too bad when nothing is moving, but the animation here is incredibly basic, even if it's present at all. It all looks kinda cheap, and unfortunately the gameplay isn't that much better. This is a single player only game with no character choices, which isn't really an issue. You move from left to right, taking on hordes of aliens with a few different varieties being added in every few levels, which does help keep things fresh. You've got your standard attack selection, hammer the button to do a combo, and you can press L or R to do a slide attack in that relevant direction, and you can also pick up a pretty decent variety of weapons. Sadly, the hit detection here isn't very good, and the aliens definitely have the upper hand in most fights. That is, unless you learn the best ways to cheese the game and to keep them at a distance, using your slide attack or your laser blast, and then most of the enemies will never get near you, even some bosses. But if you're not doing that, then you'll likely have trouble with even basic enemies. They have a much longer range attack than you, and they can do that annoying thing where they can attack you immediately after standing up or during your combo, and there's nothing you can do to defend yourself. Something that I do like though is that with your laser cannon on your shoulder, you can use it as much as you want, though it is slow to charge up, and unless it's fully charged it doesn't actually do that much damage, but it does always knock enemies down, which can buy you some time. But if you overcharge it, it does a cool clear all attack, and like I said, you can do this as much as you want, but you do have to stand still to charge it for about 5 seconds, meaning you will be vulnerable for that time. Once you get used to the janky controls on combat, you can go quite far in the game, but it definitely isn't easy, and yeah, unfortunately it's one of those games that's more of a challenge because of the poorly made gameplay, rather than it being a genuine challenge. The bosses here especially are just cheap and not very fun to fight. You do get to visit some varied locations, which helps keep things a bit fresh, but overall it's just a bit of a sloppy game, and I really wouldn't recommend it, unless you need everything AVP in your life. The PS2 got Aliens vs Predator Extinction, made by Electronic Arts, a few short years before they became Public Enemy #1. Interestingly, it's a real-time strategy game where you can choose to play as either Marines, Aliens, or Predators. Each of the factions have 7 missions that will take you across space to eradicate the others. The missions here range from having to kill everyone else on the map, to rescuing hostages, liberating bases, and more. The variety was actually quite impressive, and made each mission fresh. The main issue though is that I suck at these kinds of games, and I had trouble getting anywhere, but please remember, that's a me problem and not really a fault of the game. Though I will say that there are some aspects here that are quite confusing, like the way you get more units by finding landing zones and then having to summon them in, which does kind of make perfect sense in this world, but it has more steps to it than it really needed. A nice touch I thought though that was for the aliens, you get your facehuggers to impregnate different wildlife and marine units. Depending on what type of creature your alien bursts from determines the type of unit that you'll get, which is a really cool touch. In fact, each of the factions does feel very different, with the Marines preferring ranged combat and having an emphasis on repairing units. Predators are a decent mix of range and melee, with some really powerful weapons, but you tend to have less Predators at one time. And finally, the Aliens are fast, but don't have that much health, but you can create swarms to overwhelm your enemies. That's if you can figure out the controls. Now, admittedly, the controls aren't too bad, but selecting units and getting them to do what you want was a bit of a pain in the ass, and I found it hard to do anything precise in the heat of battle. There are buttons that will snap to certain units, and you can use the right analog stick to look anywhere on the map instantly, but again, selecting one unit and sending them across the map to defend a power node before they get smashed is very tricky, especially when there's loads of aliens surrounding you. I'm not ashamed to say that I did actually have to resort to cheats to get anywhere in this game. The thing is though, is that I did want to keep playing. The game looks really good for starters. For a 3D real-time strategy game on a console, which I don't think are particularly common, there is a lot of detail, and there's little to no slowdown, even when there's dozens of units on the screen. The landscapes aren't too varied and do risk being a bit grey and brown, but they do all match the AVP aesthetic, so fans of this series will know where they are. And the variety of units on each faction is good too, with humans, synthetics, warrior predators, drone aliens, queens, and more. The game overall runs a little slower than I would have liked, and at times it does feel like it takes ages for your units to get across the map, though this can help make sure you can keep up with them. But you know what? Despite what I don't like about the game, I still really enjoyed playing it. The varied missions and sometimes massive battles were really fun, and the fact that there's only 7 missions for each faction may not sound like a lot, but some of them will take over an hour to beat, and they get really bloody tough, especially if you're rubbish like me, so it's unlikely you'll breeze through the game. I would say give this one a try if you can, especially if you like RTS games. And finally for today we have Aliens vs Predator for the Xbox 360, made by Rebellion, who made some awesome FPS games back in the day. AVP is a first-person shooter where again you get to choose if you want to play as Marines, Aliens or Predators. What's interesting is that each of the factions has the same story, but you're just playing it from different points of view. This can mean that some of the levels and locations are reused, which is a bit of a shame, but the wildly different gameplay styles makes things feel fresh, and you'll still want to go through with all 3 story modes. The Marines are your standard FPS, with mission objectives like activating generators, find the item, escort the person, and of course wipe out any alien Marine. These are pretty much your balls to the wall action. You get some great weapons that you'll recognise from the movies, complete with their awesome sound effects, and you also have your motion tracker, so you have more of an idea when enemies start to come out of the damn walls. Although the objectives are a little generic, the level designs and excellent combat make this game just so much fun to play. The action here does a great job of going from fast and frantic in large outdoor areas to tense claustrophobic corridors where you're only armed with a pistol. When you're playing as the Predator, the game takes more of a stealth approach, giving you loads of tools to hide and to distract your enemies, so you can sneak up behind them and rip out their spine. You have various vision modes to help pinpoint enemies, and you can leap huge distances in order to hide in trees. Of course, you also have your devastating shoulder cannon, which makes short work of most enemies. You've got similar objectives here to the Marines, they just tend to involve more smashing stuff, as you try to stop the Marines from stealing Predator technology. And finally you've got the Alien campaign. The aliens are really fast and nimble. You don't have any projectile attacks, so you have to lurk in the shadows where you can't be seen. The aliens can climb any surface, and there's vents for you to hide in so you can plan your attacks. The aliens are definitely the hardest character to get used to playing as, and they can't take much of a beating. But most of their attacks are almost all one-hit kills, so when you get used to the sort of parkour you can do, they're loads of fun to play as. The Alien campaign mainly centres on you rescuing your fellow aliens too, as they've been captured, and then they hang around the levels and they can help you take down Marines and Predators. It looks really cool. As you can see, the graphics here are just awesome. The game looks fantastic with some really good graphics, some gruesome glory kills, and the character models and animation here are all great. Seeing a group of aliens running at you through the darkness just looks awesome. The same with the sound, everything just sounds like it comes straight out the movie. I really had an absolute blast playing through this one. I don't have a favourite campaign, and my only real complaint about the game is that some of the checkpoints are too far away, and there were times where I'd die and have to replay nearly the whole level. Other than that though, this game really is fantastic, and I would say it's a must-own, not just for fans of the movies, but anyone who just likes a good action game. So there you go, a brief look at 6 games based on the Alien vs Predator franchise. There's loads more of these games out there, so let us know in the comments below which ones are your favourites. On the screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do that? We've got loads of great content for you and your mother. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.